Welcome to Scramble Game Show. My name is Ife Chang. As you're watching this public access TV program, you know we bring different subject matters to this show. The public access program is a public avenue for people to express their opinion, their interests. It's a very important media for communities to talk about things, and also very educational. As you know, our Scramble Game Show is a family, children show to encourage young people to become so-called self-learner. We offer word games, math games, and so forth, but we also invite people to come to this show to talk about very interesting topic. Today, we have a very, very exciting program, and it's a very amazing in a sense that it's different from what we usually do with local politicians or professionals, talk about business, economy, and so on. This actually is a topic very important about American history, goes way back. Important in a sense, I want to hold you in sort of suspense. You will find out why it's so important. And the topic, okay, is the discovery of America. You probably say, well, we all know that. We studied in school, we have learned in the books and so on. But hold your breath. You will see this topic, discovery of America, will surprise you that certain things you may not have learned. And it's so important, you should really pay attention and stay tuned to the end. Okay, now, today, our guest, it's not from our local area. It came all the way from the state of Virginia, and that's fairly far. And her name is Mrs. Charlotte Harris Rees. She is a author, of course, wrote books about this topic area, but more importantly, she has followed the footstep of her father, who really made a significant discovery about these historical sort of events. On this particular title I just gave you is Discovery of America. Okay, so enough sort of a suspense. I will introduce our guest. Let's welcome Charlotte. Charlotte, thank you for coming.
John.
Yeah, thank you for coming all the way from Virginia.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, you picked a very nice day, and the weather's good.
Yes.
You know, the whole travel is very smooth.
Yes,
Right.
very smooth.
And New York is probably just as pretty as Virginia now, right?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Right. You know, this topic I have sort of built up a little suspense to the audience, and I know because I have communicated with you, I have seen your books and titles and so on. I believe it's exciting. That's why I dare to raise this sort of suspense to let people wait till hear your story. Now, before we begin that, let's first just talk a little bit about yourself, your background, who you are.
Okay, of course, I'm an author, but I didn't start out that way. And my father had found an old map in 1972, and then in 1973 he produced a book. And at that time, I was newly married, starting my own family, and I really wasn't interested in this topic at all. And I just thought it was just almost ridiculous. And so I started out as a skeptic. So my research on this didn't start until 2003, which was 10 years ago. And since that time, the more I research, the more information I find that my father's thesis was correct.
So, but in the ordinary sort of your work is not in research of history.
No.
So
I know. I am a college graduate of Columbia International University, and I was a social worker for a couple of years, and then I worked for Social Security Administration. And during part of the time at Social Security Administration, part of that was research, but it wasn't historical research. It was more laws and regulation type of research. So all of this is something that I've had to come into. But I've been very fortunate in that early on in studying this, I contacted a man who had researched this at early dates, and he's been my mentor, Dr. Cyclone Covey.
I see.
And so he has been my mentor and all along and continues to be. Now he will be 91 years old this month.
91 years old.
But his mind is still very good. His body is failing, but his mind is still
Well,
very strong.
we'll get to him slowly. Let's first get back to your father, since he is the discoverer of this real ancient map, right? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how he come by to find these maps, and is it along his line of work or just by some chance he discovered?
Okay, there were several generations of missionaries in my family, and my father was born in Kaifeng, Henan province.
In Kaifeng, China.
China.
I see.
And where his parents were missionaries.
I see.
They went in 1910 to China.
1910. Wow, that is the most important historical year, because that's the year before the so-called modern Republic China was born. 1911 was the first, sort of a republic born. So that period of time, at least from me, so historically, reading stuff, is so exciting, because on the one hand, the Qing dynasty is, the emperor was young, and the grandma or mom is controlling in a way. The country is really quite backward, even though China had a whole history of a very advancing sort of a culture and even technology. But that period of time, they are just like living in a cave or something. So all of a sudden, all the Western countries that basically invaded into China. So that triggered the revolution and so forth. So 1910 is
right.
your...
Well, there were definitely other missionaries before my grandparents in China.
True.
But they chose not just to live on the seaport, which many missionaries did. They were far interior China. In Henan province.
Yeah, Henan. Yeah, Henan is interior, and also is a province that at one time did have the capital of the nation. So it does have fairly rich cultural background.
Right.
So
in 1916, my father was born there.
1916, I see.
And so he learned Mandarin as early as he learned English.
Sure, I see.
And so years later, he became a missionary himself.
Oh, he's a missionary.
He was a missionary also. And so years later, after he was a missionary, he was in an antique shop in Korea and actually looking for paintings.
Yes.
And the proprietor of the shop said, well, would you like to see an old map? And he said, well, okay, I'll look at the map. And now he was aware of Chinese legends and mythology. But when he saw the map, he said he was so weak he had to sit down. Because what was important on the map is it showed where Fusang was. Now, Fusang was in endless Chinese legends.
Literature, about
they always talked about this beautiful land that's to the east of China, and many
far away from ocean.
Far away. But by that time, most people thought Fusang was just mythology.
Right, sort of like a fairy tale island or something.
But this map showed that Fusang on the American coastline. Now, after my father started researching, he discovered that most people thought that maps like this, and there were a few others around the world, they thought that the map was part real and part imaginary. Now, I don't know of any other maps that are part real and part imaginary, but the part that they thought was real, they could recognize China, Japan, Korea. But this outer ring on the map, they said, oh, well, this has
Fairy tale.
countries from the Shanhai Jing.
Yeah.
And they said the Shanhai Jing is just mythology, so they can't be real. But Fusang was on where the Americans...
Well, Shanhai Jing, the Shanhai Jing in Chinese, this book, basically is a geography book. It is very old, early, written, supposedly by, scholars. I mean, it's not fairy tale. So I think many dynasties really use that as basically an official sort of geography book.
Right, and for many years, the civil service exams in China, they had to have a knowledge of the Shanhai Jing.
Right.
They had to know about it. Well, on this map, 72% of the place names are from the Shanhai Jing.
Right. Oh, this is the map your father discovered.
That what my father found.
Yeah, I see.
But people were still saying that this is an imaginary map. So my father started a lot of research. Well, there have been people coming from other areas of study that said, no, ancient Chinese got to America. So what he did in his book was he took a lot of different Chinese writings that described Fusang. For instance, there was someone who was in the 3rd century BC.
3rd century BC, yeah.
Who said that Fusang has enormous trees, which they would have seen on the California coast, and that Fusang is 10,000 li wide. Now, if you change that to miles,
10,000 li, Chinese li.
Chinese li, that would be about 3,300 miles wide, which is about the exact width. They also said it was 10,000 li high, which would be about the
mountain,
the height of North America, going up through Canada.
Right.
So they had the width of it, and then they said when you get to the far eastern side, you come to another huge blue ocean. So now this was
all written described
300 years BC in China.
Yes.
Now, how could they know these dimensions if it was just imaginary?
Right.
All these different things. So there are a lot of different other studies that collaborate the maps.
Right. So that you say is about 1972.
That my father found the map in 72. His book.
A year later, he
a
published
year
the book.
later. But he had been doing research for some time.
Right. But by that time, he's already 50-some years old, right?
Right.
So he's been in China in a missionary for many years, and this discovery is quite late in his life, actually, at that time. Huh?
But it's his knowledge of American geography, Chinese geography,
Sure, put
Chinese
together,
legends, being able to read the map, which is in Chinese. Being able to read the map, so he was able to put all this together.
Right. Well, by this time, our conversation probably already brought the audience up to date. Now, our topic today is going to talk about this discovery of America, who discovered first before Columbus, and this is why I'm excited, and many people will be probably questioning this. All along, we believe the discoverer is Columbus, and it's in American textbooks and history books and so on. But now the evidence starts surfacing to question that, and not only through maps, but through other things, some cultural sort of objects and reasons, and even through DNA studies. We'll get to that, right?
Okay.
So we just want to make sure the audience start, getting to know what we're talking about. So when he published the book in 1973, the book title is Asiatic Fathers
of
America, right? Well, you have the book here, or you?
I didn't bring his book.
We have your image. We'll flash that image up.
Okay.
Your father's book.
His father's
and
book.
let people see the original cover of the book, right? And the book actually, you say it's about 800 pages?
It's almost 800 pages. It's 786 or
here we
something
have
like that.
this book cover. Now. That book, published in 1973, since you didn't even pay attention to it, I sort of assume not too many people really paid attention.
Well, that's interesting because in 2003, when I picked up this subject, I thought, well, this has been quite a few years since 1973. You know, is all this information wrong? And then I found that someone had written a book about my father. They had gone on this massive hunt to try to find him. Of course, back then they didn't have the internet.
Yes.
They never did find him, but they wrote several things about him. They wrote several things from his book.
I see.
Then I found him quoted in several other books. And so I thought, this is strange. You know, why are they quoting him? You know, is this really true? So I went to Dr. Covey at that time because he had written a chapter about the Shanhai Jing in a text that was about my father.
And Dr. Covey is historian himself, right?
Yes, he has his PhD in history from Stanford University.
Stanford PhD in history.
And
he's a professor.
He's a professor emeritus at Wake Forest University.
Wake Forest,
in
also
North
in
Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah.
North
Wake
Carolina.
Forest. Oh, yes,
Yes,
good school.
yes.
Yeah. So he sort of, because his research work, discovered your father's book, right?
So I called him up on the phone and I said, I thought, well, he'll just tell me that all of this has been disproven, you know, so because it's so many years. So I called him up and I said, Dr. Covey, do you know who Hendon Harris is? And he said, yes. And he said, oh, he wrote a great book. I said, well, has all of that been disproven? And he said, oh, no, there's so much more new evidence. So I thought, well, I was just going to wipe my hands and be done, you know.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, this is so important that someone needs to pick up your father's research. Well, before the conversation was over, he talked me into picking up my father's research. And he
Very good, very good. Well, let's have your father's picture. And,
okay.
Can we have Mr. Harris' photo on the...
Yes.
And I think this is amazing because, as you say, those times there's no internet. You can't just go on and the internet, go Google it or find a Wikipedia. And this is through chance. People either read a book, write about it, or somebody really pick up the phone to contact and track somebody down. So after you talk to Dr. Covey, and he basically convinced you to turn you into a research assistant.
Right. Well, he turned me into a researcher.
Yeah.
And that he would help me, which he has all along. And at first it was a little bit funny because he would say words I didn't even understand. And I'd have to go and read it in a book, you know, get it out of a dictionary and try to understand what in the world he was talking about. And then I would read it, and then he'd go back. But he'd say, okay, read this text, read this book text. What he started me on was Chinese archaeology.
Oh.
So he said, study Chinese archaeology. So there was some books on by a professor from Yale, a Chinese man. And so it's ancient Chinese from about 2000 BC, you know, that period of time. And so I spent a lot of time reading those books and trying to understand those books. And so we branched out from there. But he would just give me a few books at a time or tell me the titles, and I would get the books, and then we would discuss them. So he has been endlessly patient with me.
And definitely it seems to you know, take quite a few years of your studies to make you to sort of rewrite your father's book.
Right.
Right?
Well, initially I was asked, well, write a biography of your father. And so I thought, well, who wants to read a biography if they don't know what he wrote? And who's going to read an 800-page book?
Yeah.
So I decided on my own. My first assignment was to abridge his book, and I reorganized it a little bit. And so I did an abridgment of my father's book.
Yeah, and you published that in 2006?
Yes, 2006.
Right. And let's take a look of that book's cover. And it's same title, isn't it?
Yes, The Asiatic Fathers of America.
Yeah. And
that's a Native American on there, by the way. Some people think it's a Chinese person, but it's a Native American father and son.
Yes, I always, when I come to United States, and you know, this is way back since you have a lot of Western movies, and you always have Indians and cowboys, that kind of sort of movie, and I always find that somehow Indians do have the Asians, features, but you get sort of thrown off, because the feathers and so on. You don't pay attention to the facial other parts of a feature. You just anybody wears a feather hat is Indians, So this is interesting. So you wrote that book, and that book certainly also lead to many other opportunities for you to
And so then my next project was, okay, I need to write the information that's come out since 1973, because obviously if I'm just abridging his book, I can't put in the information about DNA and all the other studies that have happened. And I find that a lot of people, professors, have done their own little area of study. They to be effective, you have to concentrate on one little area.
This is how scholars do. They concentrate a small area and then drill down and deep and so forth.
But they're not aware of somebody else studying something that's proving the same thing.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people have tried to say this, Chinese were in America early, but they were shouted down. Oh, no, that can't possibly be. So I said, well, okay, if I bring all this together in one book, because I have over 200 sources in Secret Maps of the Ancient World, that book. I cite over 200 sources. I said, if I bring it together, it's like a tsunami of evidence, that people can't ignore it.
Right.
It's too much evidence. So some people say, oh, you have too much information in there. I said, well, it's like a table with 100 legs. If you saw off 3 of them, this table's still going to stand. It still proves the same point. So in some ways, maybe I have too much information in there, but if somebody doesn't want to read all the information, they can skip it.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly different style of recording information. As you say, some are going very specialized, narrow area, very deep, and so on. Another could be very broad, cover all references, and then for people to follow through and do their own choice, sort of to do studies. So this.
So I'm like the news reporter. I'm reporting on what everybody else has studied.
Yeah. When did you publish that book then?
That was published in 2008.
2008. And the title of that book?
Is Secret Maps of the Ancient World.
Oh, you have it here, right?
Yeah, Secret Maps of
we
the
can.
Ancient World.
Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah, we have an image of this one, but I think, of course, this real cover is much clearer. You can see that's.
And
Secret
Dr. Chung,
Maps.
the idea behind this book is that people knew about these maps, but they didn't understand them.
Right.
So it's like the Da Vinci Code, which of course is fiction, but it's truth that's hidden in plain sight. These are in famous museums around the world.
Yes.
And so nobody's put it together that this is a real map.
Right. And of course the map sort of creation, it's a fairly modern sort of technology in the sense that the using latitude, altitude, and all this sort of dimensional scale and so forth is recent science.
Well, not all of these maps have the lines on them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so the older ancient maps are not. That's why I guess many times people treat them as antique, interesting piece object. But they're not referring them as some, factual or data that to be sort of investigated. But now you have brought this together and correlate them, particularly now with modern information, knowledge, and so forth, and that would prove the connection and prove the fact that the things did happen 1,000 years ago and so forth, right? So this is very, very valuable. I mean, first time when I heard about your work, and I'm quite interested and very excited. I said, well, I must meet you and invite you over. And I think it's this kind of a research and study that really brings people together. We are claiming now in a global society now. But as you know, we still have different culture, different people, sometimes prejudice and so forth. But studies like this and research like this, I think will really, bring people into the common fold. Yeah. So
Right.
after this book, what did you you get as a reaction?
I started traveling and speaking. I've had a lot of opportunities to speak. Well, starting even before I did the abridgment of my father's book, I was invited to speak at the Library of Congress. So I've spoken at the Library of Congress.
That's because they had some special symposium.
Yes, they had a Zhenghe Symposium. It's sort of a strange story. I got into all of this because I had read Gavin Menzies' book, 1421, and
okay, hold it. Gavin Menzies is a British author,
right,
and he has written a book that it's become a bestseller.
right.
And what was that title? I don't
1421, the year China discovered America.
Oh, so that title itself very direct and that probably very provocative is 1421 is the year, right?
Right.
So he basically claimed in 1421 the Chinese has discovered America.
Right.
That's his book.
So when I read in the newspaper about his book, I thought, well, maybe my father was right. So I read his book. I read Gavin Menzies' book. And I said, there are even indications in this book that Chinese came earlier than 1421.
From your map sort of deduction?
No, even from his, Gavin Menzies'
Oh, his own book.
His own book.
So why he picked that 1421 then?
That's when he said that Zhenghe came.
Oh,
And,
yes, that's the most famous or known historical maritime activity. 郑和 in Chinese pronunciation,
Right.
郑和
Zhenghe.
is a sailor.
Right.
And the king or emperor basically commissioned him to sort of survey the world,
Right.
right? And has given him lots of money to build big ships so that he could sail, the world. So that person is at least in history is very famous. So everybody knows that he has traveled all over the place.
Right.
Yeah. But discovering America was, at least to me, was not mentioned or anywhere in our textbooks. So I could never even imagine that he had been possible, either him or his fleet of sailors had discovered America.
Well, Zhenghe's ships were 10 times the size of Columbus' largest ships. So if ships couldn't get to America, it's possible that they could have. You can't say just because you're Chinese you can't come to America.
True.
We're going to let the Europeans come. And there were people in America when Columbus arrived. The Indians were standing there. Nobody denies the Indians were standing there. So how they even came up with that Columbus discovered America, well, it wasn't even a public holiday until the 20th century. They didn't really make it a public holiday. So it's...
there are people always said that he really discovered West Indies and not really America and so on and so forth. There are some kind of, but I think
But even there were people there
right.
when he arrived.
Yeah, true. So so the second question, more deeper, is that how did these original American Indians or Aborigines came from, right?
Right,
and
right.
When? That's the question. And you think these maps did sort of shed some light on this, huh?
Right. Well, let me go back to talking about Gavin Menzies.
Sure.
So I had read his book and I sent him an email. And a lot of people are afraid of sending an author an email, but I'm not.
No, that's normal, yeah.
So several months later, he contacted me back and he said, I need to see your maps. Well, at that time, they were at the Library of Congress where they stayed for 3 years.
I see.
So
you gave it to the Congress.
They were at the Library of Congress for 3 years while we were having people come in to study them. So he came in from London to see the maps. And at that time, he said to me, there's not a chance in 100 million that your father was wrong.
Oh, I see.
So currently, he's writing another book saying that Chinese came much earlier than Zhenghe.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
so he's going to write another book to even claim the discoveries before 1421.
Right.
I see. And that book is forthcoming?
That's what I hear.
I
That's
see.
what I hear. That the Chinese got here earlier.
And I understand Gavin is not really a scholar per se. Was it his profession? Is it just he's a Navy officer?
Right, right.
I see. So he must have traveled a lot and interested in
Yes,
traveling and
yes.
maps and so on.
So anyway, right after that, when I met Gavin at the Library of Congress, they invited him to speak at the Library of Congress.
I see. Uh-huh.
And so he said that he would go. Normally he gets a good fee for appearing, but he said he would go if they would invite me, and he had like 3 or 4 other people that he wanted them to invite. They had no idea really much about me, but they said, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll let Charlotte speak."
Well, he basically defined a team, a core of people.
So it's not that we're very loosely connected,
right?
You know, and not everything he says.
But the
I
common
agree with.
bond is you all believed in these maps that are genuinely factual data that can indicate the discovery of America.
Right, right. And so he opened the door for several of us who are studying on different areas of this, that people will consider this because he has a best-selling book.
Right, there's a bestseller.
So it brought the world's attention. There have been a lot of books written on this subject, and one of the ways to disprove something is to ignore it.
True.
And so you don't really disprove it, but if you ignore information,
it's equivalent to disprove, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he opened the door that people couldn't ignore this anymore.
So what are the maps that he wanted to see? Can we flash some on?
Sure.
I guess you had a couple of images. I think it's in our list probably is number 11. Number 11.
Okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned that map.
Okay,
as old as in the Ming Dynasty, you say?
Now this particular one is a more recent one. The other one that we'll show in a minute.
Okay.
And our maps, our particular maps, are in Korean books. But there was another book that we'll talk about a little bit later. It's Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus. I talk in detail about these maps, but they're in Korean books. But these maps originated from the Chinese. Now, the oldest positively dated map of this style is actually in a Chinese text.
I see.
And this is discussed by Dr. Joseph Needham.
Oh, Joseph Needham.
Science and Civilization in China. You know, he's written volumes and volumes about Chinese, how advanced the Chinese were.
Right.
And so he discusses this, that the oldest one, now he even mentions a literary mention from about 300 AD of a map of this style. And he discusses the concentric circles and the Fusang tree. Now, if we could go to the other map, I would like to...
The next one, okay.
Right.
The next one is the older map. It was number 12, I think, on our list here. Yep.
And this one's from the Ming Dynasty. Now, I was told from an expert from Beijing that the 2 red circles on this map represent China and Korea.
Yeah, it's towards the right of this map, right?
Right,
yeah.
Correct.
2 red circles indicate the Fusan area.
No, that's not the Fusang. That's China and Korea. The 2 red circles.
The 2 red circles. Okay.
So it's a map that's centered on China. China's in the middle. And if you look at this map, on the far right side, it circles around. Okay. We will see in a little bit that there's another Chinese map that shows the world like that. Now, if you go to the west from China on this map, you'll see India, and and then you'll see Africa. And now above Africa is a little ocean. Now it's not open to the outside, but it's the Mediterranean, and above that is Europe. Okay, so and then to the far left side is also a ring. So what this represents, is America cut in two. There's the west side of America, the Americas on the right side, and the east side on the left side of the map.
So at that time, do people at that time believe that the Earth is a sphere or not?
Okay, they had a sphere for the stars, but now what the outer circle on this is,
right?
It looks like an extra ocean. That's, from my studies I've learned, that's where the Earth meets the sky. So it's not water at all. So
they don't really know for sure it's circular as far as the Earth goes, but they have at least go far enough to those areas to identify, the land and the ocean.
Right. So that's where the Earth meets the sky. So if you take out that extra circle, it's more square. Now the Chinese believed the Earth was square, the sky was round. And so if you take one of these maps, make a photocopy of it, so it's more of a square. But that's what it was. Now, one of the interesting things is the islands in the middle. Say there are too many islands.
Right.
Well, the ones that are rectangles, that are all about the same size, they're not really islands. They're legends that tell something.
Landmarks, basically.
Yeah, they tell about what's on the land.
Right.
They tell about what's on the land. Now, there are some islands in there, but you'll note on the outer ring where it's sky, there's no islands or nothing out there.
Yeah,
Now, one of the interesting features is on the far right side of this map is a tree. And under the tree, it says the sun rises here. On the far left side is another tree. It says the sun sets here. And then there's another tree at the top, and there's a frozen area on the top. So we can know the directions because maps from a long time ago didn't always have north at the top.
Good thing. I don't know, at that time the compass was already invented, right?
You're right. We're not quite sure exactly when the compass was invented. But let me tell you a little bit about the Fusang tree. Remember I told you that
the California,
the
Fusang tree, the tall tree.
Right. Well, the man that wrote about that, he described it. He said it was like a evergreen tree. His descriptions of it. And another thing he said was that two trees would also often grow out of one root. Well, just in studying on the internet recently, I found that the redwoods sometimes do.
Oh yeah, we can drive car in through the redwood. Is a commonplace, right?
But they said because of the way the bark is, that if they're close to each other, they sort of commingle, and they do that. So anyway, the Fusang tree is one of the very interesting features about this map. I was speaking at a university. And some man came up to me and he said that he was a PhD in environmental studies. He said, "What are you doing having a sequoia on a Chinese map?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, I can tell by the configuration of the needles." He says, "I've done papers on this. This is a sequoia tree." Well, sequoia is native to America.
Right.
So, even by looking at how the needles on this Fusang tree, now only the older maps have the trees on them, but they do give us direction, and to bring the sequoia into it is really an amazing thing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. Now let's take a pause here. I just wonder, at this point, if you can tell us assessment from a general sort of the circles you meet and you talk. Are people treating this as circumstantial evidence, or really treating this as more serious things that can prove, disprove? What's the general, sort of assessment on these maps?
I think more and more people are realizing that these are real maps. Now, when I originally went to the Library of Congress, they directed me to a book that's called History of Cartography.
Right.
And that book said that 72% of the place names on maps of this style are from the Shanghai Jing, but they thought that the map was part real, part imaginary. Now, since then, the Library of Congress has come out with a a book, another book about maps, and they have said that they think that this might really be America on the right side. But now they're in that original book that I mentioned, they didn't even know the date that this map originated. They said nobody even knows the century. And now they're making the date 1592.
Oh, but much later than 1421, though.
Well,
right.
To me, I think it's almost laughable because remember what happened in 1492? Columbus came. So you're going to, 100 years after this, you're going to suddenly make this
a map, yeah.
yeah, that this map was from that period of time. But what's interesting, too, is that this is co-authored by the Geography and Maps Division of the Library of Congress. There's a Chinese book, 1562, that has this map in it.
Oh, so is that book also you have?
That's the one that Joseph Needham mentions.
Right. Do we have the picture of the cover of that book?
No, not the 1562 book.
No. Okay.
But see, it's when he mentions the 1562 book, and he said, but this map is also mentioned in the 3rd century A.D., and how they mention it is it has concentric circles and has the Fusang tree.
Ah.
What other map would it be with the Fusang tree, you know, and the concentric circles? And what this person that was from the 3rd century A.D., he mentioned an incident in the first year of the Shang, 1766.
Shang Dynasty.
B.C.
Right.
In which the emperor wanted to see this map. Somebody had this map. The emperor wanted to see this map, and he threw himself on the ground. Well, can you imagine an emperor throwing himself on the ground, begging to see this map? So this map, or one like it, was around from before the Shang Dynasty. Because this is the first year of the Shang. So that would put it all back in the time period that my father was saying, too.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's unfortunately that these kind of maps cannot be sort of carbon dated, right?
Well, they can be. But my father's are copies of copies of copies. Obviously,
right.
You know, there's not going to be
Not the
maps
original,
from 2000 BC. There's nothing really from 2000 BC anymore.
I guess that might be the doubting people's sort of claim that since you don't really have the original production, so it's hard to sort of claim as evidence that this is a genuine map. It could have been, say, I wouldn't say forged, but it's just composite of several maps or added with the later people's imagination. So that may be, one of the rationale people would like to, sort of dispute this. But I think that chain of thought may not hold water when you have several other, things that can corroborate with these maps, not just maps alone.
Right. Well, there's archaeological evidence, like in China, they found peanuts in 2 different provinces that date to 2000 BC. So, because they're 2000 BC, and they're native to America, now how did they get over to China in 2000 BC? So
somebody brought it back. You say peanuts?
Peanuts that are native to the Americas. They have no explanation.
I have no knowledge that peanuts would be have different species that are native of America.
Yeah.
I see. I love peanuts. I always like, particularly the Georgia, area, the big peanuts. Whereas in Chinese, the Chinese peanuts are small. Sometimes they're more tasty, but they're tiny. But the peanuts here is larger size. So.
Well, they found the ones that are native to the Americas in China in 2 different provinces. That
could be dated by.
They have been carbon dated to around 2000 BC.
I see. So that's another corroborative evidence.
Right, and there are many different things like this that date the time period to about 2000 BC.
So it definitely raises sort of thinking that the traveling or communication of the Chinese with America as a continent really dates back.
Right. Now, another thing too is a lot of people say, well, yeah, we know that people came from Asia over the land bridge, and they'll put it, so many thousand years ago. However, more and more they're going away from the idea of the land bridge, which was really the invention of a Catholic priest in the 1500s. He came up with this idea that there was a land bridge, and by that theory they would have been blocked by ice for 500 years, so they would have stood there in the cold with no cold weather gear, no source of heat. Now, I'm not going to dispute...
You mean this is go through Alaska?
If they came that way. So more and more are going away from that idea, and they came by boat. And there are currents in the Pacific that actually bring items over.
Yeah.
And I think I have some pictures.
Right, that picture is interesting. Right, we have that picture that shows the current that is sort of called a conveyor. It's number 7 on our collection here. It's an ocean current. I think all sailors know about these things.
Right, and this diagram is one that's put out by the U.S. government. It's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it shows that these conveyors are all over the world. Now, another thing I want to point out just really quick is that this is actually shaped like my father's map. See, America's on the right side, and then there's another part of America on the left side.
Right.
The North and South America. So this one is actually centered on...
So if you set off a boat, you can follow this sort of the red current, travel all the way across.
Yeah. Just recently there was a rowboat that came across from the Japanese tsunami. There's been so much that's been washed over, and the rowboat, of course, had no sail or anything. It's just brought it over
by the current.
By the current.
Oh, this is recent after the tsunami?
Oh, yeah. This just happened about a week ago. It was in the news.
Oh, interesting.
But there have been many ships over the years that have been brought over by this current. And if you'll notice that it's a circular current, so someone could come and go back.
Yes.
But I brought a motorcycle over. I don't even understand. I brought a dock over.
Really?
But all these different things. Of course, there's some toys that have brought over, some soccer balls and different things that they've been able to take back to Japan. But
how do they prove it's really from Japan?
Oh, they might have like somebody's name on it, or the name of a town, or the name of a school.
Really?
Right.
Okay.
So the one rowboat
it's not somebody in this country just dump it in the water.
Oh, no. And people on the West Coast are very concerned about all the things that have come over, because it's also bringing non-native animals and
I see. Yeah, contaminate.
Not animals, but ocean life.
Right.
And there was a boat that came over recently that had a live fish in it.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
But anyway, in the 20th century, several groups tried this on rafts and small boats, and they came all the way across on this current. You don't even have to have a sail, and this current is actually 100 kilometers wide. So that's like 62 miles wide.
What is the speed? How long would it take to go across?
There was one group that came over in 57 days.
Wow.
Yeah, they came over.
So definitely one can do experiment on this very easily.
Right. And there have been several groups that have tried it out. And they'll start, it goes up past Taiwan, past Japan, and then comes over. And then there's a recent bestseller out that's called Unbroken. And
Unbroken.
Unbroken, and it's about a World War II era plane that went down, and a life raft came out.
Right.
And there were 3 men that got in 2 life rafts. 2 of them survived, but they survived for 47 days by catching rainwater and fish.
Oh, I see.
With really no provisions.
Right.
And they went all that time on that current. So people could have survived crossing the ocean that way.
Okay. Well, this is really fascinating. There's another sort of evidence I remember you mentioned before. It's these huge stone anchors.
Yes.
And that's definitely related to big ships,
Right.
right? And tell us about that part of it, sort of as evidence, as story.
Well, several years ago, a man named Bob Maestro, who's the founder of Body Glove Wetsuits, he lives in California, and he was diving, and we met him, and he was telling the story about this. He looks for microscopic shells.
Shells.
And
yeah.
so he takes a bank envelope
Uh-huh.
and with a zipper on it, puts it in his wetsuit and goes down, and he finds
Collects these
where there's a
shells,
little
yeah.
depression, and so he scoops up the sand and puts it in there. Well, he started scooping and scooping and scooping, and it went down further and further. So he found that there was something big and round and had a hole in it. And so so up till now, they've discovered over 30 of these on the ocean bed. Now, this I think we have a picture of
Yes,
of
yes,
him.
we do have a picture. In fact, let's see. Maybe we will show the picture you and Mr. Maestro together. Okay, that is number 13. Is it? I think it's number 13. Either that or maybe number 20.
Right.
Yeah.
That's me with Bob Maestro. That's
Right,
one of
right.
the anchors. Now,
Okay.
now there's another one with just him and the anchors. That other picture with him and the anchors.
Be clearer on the anchor.
Well, it shows the size of the anchors. One of them, the other one with just him,
That's the number 13. Okay.
it shows that.
Oh yes.
He said it's split in half. Now the one on the left split in half as it was being brought up out of the ocean, and
I
he
see.
said it would have weighed a ton. And he was told that judging the mineral accumulation on these, that they had been on the seabed 3,000 to 4,000 years.
I see.
Now this was a type of anchor that Chinese used in their old ships.
Yes. Use
Now-
the rocks. Yeah.
Now there's another author who's written actually textbooks about the Chinese maritime activities and socioeconomic development, Gangdong, from the London School.
Gandun, right?
Yes, yes.
Is it Chinese?
Yes, yes. He's from the London School of Economics.
Right. He wrote
a
about these
doctor,
maritime
yeah.
activities. Yeah.
And it's actually a college text. But starting in around 2000 BC, Chinese were going to sea.
Right.
They were traveling. They were coming and going. So this is possible, that they were doing this. And by 2000 BC, they didn't just have rafts; they had ships that were made with planks.
And this correlates really well with like Deng He's, the big ships that 10 times bigger than the Columbus.
Right.
They would have to have a huge anchor in order to stop.
Well, now
and so
by Zheng He's era, they weren't using anchors like this.
No.
They had more modern anchors. This is really old. This
Really
is
old.
like 3,000 years old. 3 to 4,000 years old.
Yes, that's really amazing. Well, so that's certainly also another sort of possible evidence, corroborating with the story. Another one, of course, we come down to real scientific one, is the DNA, right?
Right.
Now, tell us about the DNA discovery nowadays. People.
Oh, okay. Now, the way that they do DNA, and you might want to show that
The picture?
picture of the
All right.
mitochondrial DNA.
DNA picture is number 19. Yeah.
I think most people realize that our DNA is shown by double helix. Well, outside the DNA is like a circular type of design, which is much easier to access than the double helix.
Right.
And that's called mitochondrial DNA. And mitochondrial DNA is passed unchanged from mother to child for generations.
Oh, I see.
It only passes through the women. I mean, the mother will give it to her son, but the son won't pass it on.
Yeah.
Now, it's like the mother gives a photocopy of her DNA, gives it to the child. The child gives it. So you can look back many generations
Won't change.
with this mitochondrial DNA. Now, after a long period of time, there might be a very small change, and ever after, then every other one will have that same change. So they can tell, okay, that's how they tell that the Native American DNA is from Asia. Okay, they've divided the mitochondrial DNA of all the people in the world into different groups.
Yeah.
haplogroups, okay. And the ones of Native Americans are 98% of them are A, B, C, and D. Now, of course, that's widely found in the Native Americans. It's also found only in Asia, only from Asians. But it's not real common in Asia.
Yeah.
So there's specific areas where it's found in Asia. A, B, C, and D are all found in Han Chinese.
Yeah, Han Chinese.
Okay, the other 2% is X.
Right.
Now, X is found in China, but it's also found in Europe. So, you know, this question, okay, there could have been, it could have come from Europe, the other 2% could have come from Europe, or it could have come from China. But it could have all five could have come from China.
So this definitely is leading into much more sort of a modern way of try to, identify, the people, Indians, where they come from. I tell you...
Can I tell you about the recent studies?
Yeah, quickly. Okay. We are running out of time.
Okay. Well, the recent studies on the genealogies of celebrities.
Yeah.
And they did Yo-Yo Ma's.
Yes, Yo-Yo Ma, famous...
genealogy. And his parents were the first generation out of China. And they didn't think anybody else had come out of China. Well, they had just done the DNA studies on Eva Longoria, who's Native American. They said, you're related to Eva Longoria.
So they are related to Yo-Yo Ma.
They're related. So they are already starting to do these DNA connections.
Very interesting.
And it's my prediction that very soon in the future, there'll be big...
Right. Charlotte, I tell you, when we talk about something interesting, time flies. Our 1 hour is up, so we have to close. We definitely think about getting you back again or do another show. So we probably should summarize a little bit, then I'll have to close the show.
Okay.
This question, who discovered America, and before Columbus, is such an interesting, question. And through this discussion, I mean, there's so many evidences, starting from the map to other corroborative sort of evidence. I really think it's very difficult for us to sort of ignore this. Okay, I'm sure if people watching this show and probably will come, asking more questions, and you will have given so many references. You have your books and you have your website that they can go to, right? Hopefully. This question will be eventually, 100% sort of answered, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think if we can do that another show again, we'll do a little summary of this discussion.
Sure.
Today we have sort of like a very casual, the way we just touch upon many things. I think maybe we do a summary and can get a more concrete picture, and people will, take away much clearer, sort of as research is supposed to do, make people believe what is the truth, what is the fact, right?
Right.
Yeah. So thank you for coming to our show, and we'll welcome you to come again, and we definitely should keep communication. So if we hear things that people interested in your work, we'll refer to you. And
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. So now. To the audience, and unfortunately 1 hour just passed by. If you are the fortunate few that turned on this television at this time and you stayed with us the past hour, I'm sure you are fascinated, and I'm sure you have heard enough to arouse your interest and to go on sort of do your own search. At least check out some of the references, okay? Thank you for watching. This is Scrammble Game Show. My name is Ify Chang, and good night.